So let me ask you this, why is it hilarious when a black comedian jokes about black culture, but the moment he flips it and mocks white culture, suddenly it's racist? Let's break this down. Since 2017, Druski has been shaking up the internet with comedy skits that quickly struck a chord, especially with black audiences who saw their everyday experiences reflected in his humor. Over the years, his relatability turned into loyalty, building a fan base that stretched beyond the black community. Wanting to reach even wider audiences, Druski began experimenting with riskier material, most notably, skits where he impersonated a white guy. Those sketches exploded online, drawing laughs and even admiration from some viewers who thought the performance was clever and spot-on. Others, however, were unsettled by how familiar the character felt, as if they had seen someone just like him before. But the reaction wasn't all positive. Many white viewers accused Druski of whiteface, labeling his satire as offensive or even as a form of reverse racism. Social media lit up with debates, some defending the sketches as harmless comedy, others condemning them as unfair mockery. The loudest critics came from people in the dominant culture who had no problem when Druski poked fun at black stereotypes, but suddenly cried foul when the joke shifted toward poor or country white culture, what some even called redneck portrayals. This double standard didn't go unnoticed. Commentator reignited pointed out the irony. When Druski's humor targeted black people, the same critics laughed along without complaint. But once the spotlight turned on white cultural quirks, the outrage poured in. The situation echoed another example: Charleston White. For months, White went viral for openly mocking rappers, even going so far as to disrespect deceased artists and their families. White audiences rarely objected to that, yet, when he set his sights on conservative figure Charlie Kirk, the reaction was suddenly very different.
But boy, some of the people in the dominant society, boy, they're crying foul. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Isn't this reverse racism? Hey, why are you mocking us? Oh, they're crying foul now. Now, these people who were cockeying and kikiing when Druski was kind of mocking black people, they were fine with that. Now that he went in on some rednecks and had the makeup and the aesthetics looking like them, and everybody's laughing at the rednecks now, oh, they want to cry foul. They're not laughing now.
You might assume that after the backlash from his first white guy sketch, Druski would ease up and move on. After all, the criticisms came fast and loud, with some calling the skit offensive and others accusing him of pushing stereotypes too far. But that's not the case. Instead of retreating, Druski leaned into the controversy, teasing a part 2 of the viral skit on Twitter. For him, comedy has never been about playing it safe. It's about poking fun at the absurdities of everyday life, even if it means ruffling feathers along the way. Naturally, his announcement triggered another wave of online commentary. Some fans expressed excitement, saying they couldn't wait to see what he would do next. But others rolled their eyes, complaining that the concept was starting to wear thin. "We've seen this before," one commenter wrote. "It's just the same stereotypes recycled over and over." To them, the white guy act was less about clever satire and more about leaning on predictable Yet, comedy is rarely just about the joke itself. It's about what the joke represents, who it's aimed at, and the cultural baggage it carries. And that's where things get complicated. One user on Twitter posed the inevitable question, one that always arises in these debates: why is it socially acceptable for a black comedian to perform whiteface, while blackface is universally condemned? For people unfamiliar with the deeper history, it feels like a double standard, but context is everything. Enter Grok, the AI that often gets pulled into online cultural debates. Grok laid out the historical backdrop with clarity. Blackface, Grok explained, wasn't simply a comedic device. It originated in the 19th century during minstrel shows performances, where white actors would paint their faces black and exaggerate their features in grotesque ways. These shows weren't harmless entertainment. They were a tool of oppression, caricaturing black people as lazy, unintelligent, buffoonish, and unfit for equality. These portrayals helped justify racist laws, segregation, and violence. They weren't just jokes, they were propaganda that shaped public perception for decades, embedding harmful stereotypes that black people are still fighting against today. Whiteface, on the other hand, has no such history. When a black comedian imitates white culture, it's usually satire, parody, or social commentary. Think of Druski skits, or the 2004 comedy White Chicks. where Sean and Marlon Wayans flipped the script by dressing as white socialites. These portrayals poke fun at quirks and stereotypes without carrying the same legacy of systemic oppression. That doesn't mean everyone finds them funny, but the cultural weight isn't remotely comparable. Still, critics argue that satire can cut both ways. To them, whiteface reinforces divisions rather than bridging them. They see it as unfair. If society condemns one kind of racial impersonation, shouldn't it condemn all? On the surface, the argument sounds like common sense, but the truth is more nuanced. Race in America has never been an even playing field. Black communities endured centuries of slavery, segregation, and discrimination. Their culture was mocked, commodified, and criminalized. White communities, by contrast, have historically wielded institutional power. So when a black comedian imitates white stereotypes, it's punching up, not down. The sting just isn't the same. This is where the power dynamics Grok mentioned come into play. Humor doesn't exist in a vacuum. A joke told by someone in a dominant group about a marginalized group has a different impact than a joke told in the opposite direction. It's the difference between satire and mockery, critique and cruelty. Druski's whiteface isn't rooted in a history of systematic exclusion, it's rooted in observation and exaggeration of cultural behaviors. That distinction matters, even if some refuse to acknowledge it. As reactions poured in, the debate only grew louder. Some predicted that Druski's next skit would spark even more outrage, accusing him of chasing shock value for clicks. Others shrugged off the controversy, praising him for his boldness and for lampooning aspects of white American culture that rarely get satirized in mainstream comedy. One fan commented, "Druski just dropped another hilarious skit about folks who are way too proud to be American." For them, the humor wasn't malicious, it was sharp social commentary on exaggerated patriotism and cultural quirks that felt familiar, even to those outside the communities being portrayed. But beneath the laughter and criticism lies something deeper. Comedy has always been a reflection of cultural tension. Jokes can seem harmless on the surface, but they often reveal truths that people would rather avoid. In Druski's case, his white guy skits highlight dynamics of privilege, cultural pride, and sometimes hypocrisy. They force audiences to reckon with questions they'd rather not ask. Why does it sting when someone imitates us? What truths are being exposed in the parody? And why do we react so differently depending on who tells the joke? Historically, comedy has been one of the few spaces where marginalized voices could push back against dominant narratives. From Richard Pryor to Dave Chappelle, black comedians have used humor to unpack racial dynamics, sometimes in ways that make audiences uncomfortable. Druski's work fits into that tradition. His whiteface skits are not simply about getting laughs, they're about holding up a mirror, one that reflects not only the quirks of white culture, but also the double standards in how society polices humor. The backlash also reveals something about fragility. When white audiences laugh at stereotypes about black culture, the humor is often dismissed as just jokes. But when the tables are turned, those same audiences are more likely to call foul. This discrepancy exposes how humor can reinforce or challenge social hierarchies. Druski's skits disrupt the comfortable narrative that whiteness is neutral, invisible, or beyond critique. By exaggerating certain cultural behaviors, he makes whiteness visible in a way that some people aren't used to, and that visibility can be unsettling. Yet, the outrage also shows the power of comedy to spark dialogue. For every critic calling Druski offensive, there are others pointing out the hypocrisy of those complaints. Social media threads are filled with debates about history, racism, satire, and the role of comedians in challenging norms. Whether people find the skits funny or not, they're talking about issues that usually go unexamined. That in itself is a form of impact. At the end of the day, Druski isn't likely to stop making these skits. He thrives on pushing boundaries, and the controversy only amplifies his reach. For his fans, the humor offers a release, a chance to laugh at cultural quirks without taking them too seriously. For his critics, the skits are a reminder that comedy can sting when it touches on truths you'd rather not face. And for society at large, the debate is a microcosm of a much bigger question. How do we navigate humor in a world where history, power, and identity are always in play? In many ways, the skit isn't really about Druski at all. It's about us, our sensitivities, our blind spots, our willingness or unwillingness to confront uncomfortable realities. That's the beauty and danger of comedy. It sneaks truth into places where lectures and arguments can't reach. It disarms us with laughter, then leaves us with questions we can't easily shake. So while some may dismiss Druski's white guy act as repetitive or others see it as a bold exploration of cultural tension, wrapped in humor. And maybe that's the point. Comedy doesn't have to provide answers, just has to spark the conversation. Druski has done that, and whether people love him or hate him for it, the fact remains, he's not just telling jokes. He's holding up a mirror, and the reflection, for some, is too real to laugh at.
When I'm controlling about their dead babies and dead mammies, you don't say shit, so what do you mean why? I'm a fucking comedian. Like the with anybody. Satire comedy is what we call it. First, how you gonna take that away from me? So Charlie's no exemption. Don't you first joke about fentanyl Floyd? He's no different than a fentanyl Floyd. Floyd was the Black Lives Matter movement. Kirk is a fucking white ring consider movement. We get to joke about one another. Remember?
A recent discussion around Druski's latest skit highlighted just how layered his comedy can be. A mixed-race commentator broke it down, pointing to a scene where Druski, dressed in his white guy persona, pulled up on someone headed to a NASCAR race. The interaction seemed lighthearted at first, but quickly took on a different tone. "Hey, you lost, bro," Druski asked, leaning into the role. "No, sir. I'm going to the NASCAR race," the young man replied politely. "You sure you're not lost?" "Yes, sir. Find something safe to do, boy." On the surface, it could be brushed off as playful banter. The kind of exchange you might hear in a comedy sketch designed to exaggerate stereotypes for laughs. But the undertones ran much deeper. The young man's responses, "Yes sir," "No sir," were not just polite. They echoed a pattern of submissiveness that has long been ingrained in black people navigating white-dominated spaces, especially in the South. The scene captured more than a joke. It reflected an uncomfortable truth about racial dynamics in America. Druski's performance amplified this dynamic in a way that was both subtle and piercing. By having his white character use the phrase, "Find something safe to do, boy," the skit tapped into a historical wound. That single word "boy" has been used for generations by white men to demean black men, stripping them of dignity and manhood. It's not just a word, it's a reminder of a time when black people were expected to be deferential, cautious, and obedient in the face of white authority. The tension in the scene wasn't accidental, it was intentional commentary wrapped in comedy. For someone like me, growing up in California, encounters like this might feel foreign. Out west, the racial climate isn't identical to the South's, and the social environments are often more diverse. But in the Deep South, particularly in spaces like NASCAR events, the undercurrents of racial tension can still be felt. Druski wasn't making up a scenario for shock value. He was drawing from a reality that persists, one that many black people in those settings still recognize as part of their lived experience. This is precisely why his comedy hits so hard, and why it stirs discomfort among white audiences. Comedy, at its sharpest, works like a mirror. It reflects not only what we want to see, but also what we would prefer to ignore. When Druski dons his white-faced persona, he doesn't parody the powerful or the glamorous. He doesn't mock CEOs, Silicon Valley elites, or Ivy League graduates. Instead, he turns his attention to the working, rural slice of white America, the ones who fill the stands at NASCAR, who live in small towns across the South, who cling tightly to traditions of patriotism and conservatism. And that's where the sting lies. For many white viewers, this isn't just comedy, it's exposure. These are the parts of their culture they don't want to see spotlighted. They'd rather hide the dysfunction, the poverty, and the backward behaviors that exist in their communities. Yet, black communities are constantly forced under the magnifying glass. From media portrayals of inner-city crime to stereotypes about laziness, broken families, or poverty, black life is routinely scrutinized, judged, and mocked. Druski's skit flips that script. By holding up a mirror to rural white culture, he reveals that no community is immune to dysfunction. Just as there are stereotypes about black neighborhoods, there are equally unflattering realities in poor white America, whether it's substance abuse, lack of opportunity, or toxic forms of nationalism. But when those truths are put on display, suddenly the laughter stops. The outrage, then, isn't really about Druski's portrayal. It's about having uncomfortable truths dragged into the open. The backlash reveals something about the way whiteness functions in America. Whiteness is often treated as a default, a standard, a kind of invisible cultural baseline. It's assumed to be normal, neutral, and beyond criticism. That invisibility allows white people to critique other groups without expecting the same scrutiny in return. But Druski disrupts that comfort. By caricaturing white culture, he forces whiteness into visibility, and for many, that feels like an attack. This is why the reaction to Druski is so telling. When he pokes fun at black stereotypes, many white viewers laugh freely, seeing it as harmless entertainment. But when the same comedic lens is turned back on them, the tone shifts. It becomes offensive, unfair, or racist. The double standard is glaring. It's fine to laugh at others, but not okay when the joke's on you. What Druski accomplishes, intentionally or not, is to highlight that double standard. His comedy underscores the fact that dysfunction and embarrassment exist in every community, not just in black neighborhoods. The difference is that white America often has the privilege of hiding theirs, while black America's flaws are broadcast on repeat. When a comedian shines a spotlight on the redneck caricature, the loud patriot, the drunk tailgater, the small-town troublemaker, he is reminding audiences that stereotypes cut both ways. Of course, the critique isn't that all white people fit this image, just as not all black people live up to negative stereotypes. Not all white people embody the NASCAR beer-guzzling caricature, but Druski's choice to highlight that group isn't random. It's deliberate. He's poking at the segment of white culture that often embraces racial superiority while refusing to acknowledge its own social and economic shortcomings. By laughing at them, he levels the playing field in a way that comedy rarely does. The deeper point is this: satire doesn't invent problems, it exposes them. If Druski's portrayal rings true enough to spark outrage, then perhaps it's not the comedian people are angry at, it's the mirror he's holding up. For a culture that often insists on black accountability, the discomfort comes when that accountability is turned back on themselves. And that's why Druski's comedy is so effective. It's not just entertainment, it's cultural critique disguised as humor. His whiteface skits force viewers to confront the fact that America's racial dynamics are still alive and well. They reveal that every community has its flaws, and no one gets to claim cultural perfection. If it's true, it's true. And truth, especially when it's about yourself, can be the hardest thing to laugh at.